no comments on the past, but I learned something waiting here, that the I-1 area that we're describing off of 980 is approximately 100 acres with no reasonable concentration of population around it. Would you be opposed to this if it was in I-2, which according to my message here is up against Blakemore, Hillmore, Rockmore, and Slatemore Drives, all occupied in high-density communities? There's only 2 I-2s in the entire township. That one has more homes, and oh, by the way, I think there's a 1,000-foot setback requirement from a compressor station. Am I correct, John?
You know, I don't know if we've updated to have it to 1,000 feet or not. I don't know that we have defined setbacks in our current ordinance. If we do, it's probably less than that because it was in place before Act 13.
If you don't, it could not be built in I-2, as there are no 2,000-foot longitudes in any direction in which that plant could be put into the I-2, because there are homes on Route 50, Millers Run Road, Blakemore, and all the other places, as well as Southview Road. The I-2, so let's take this thought process. Nobody's opposed to it if it's in heavy industrial. Let's put it in I-2. So I guess all these people aren't going to complain because it's going to be over the hill, but I bet the people in Blakemore, Rockmore, whatever those houses are, and oh, by the way, I think it would be in violation of your setback ordinances. So if we look at I-2 and say, it's okay to be there. Oh, by the way, it's adjacent to I-1. In case anybody hasn't looked, there's an equally large as the one, almost as large as the one we're talking about, I-1, right next to it. So my question is, would everybody drop their opposition if Mark West put an application in to put it into the I-2 tomorrow?
Here's why the board can't.
It's a theoretical question.
No, you're right, because look, we've looked at that. I remember in the past, because we looked at some of our industrial areas saying, boy, there's some residential areas that are further away from anybody than any of our industrial areas. And we really have to look, and the board hasn't gotten into this, I have with other municipalities, of looking from a comprehensive scheme. What do we do? Do we need to probably rezone some areas that may allow for industrial activity or mineral overlay districts that are further away from people to comply with the constitutional mandates? So you're right. I mean, that's definitely a concern, but those people would be entitled to their due process. They would come in, and the board would have a similar concern as to whether they would be affected regardless of what zone it's at.
So basically, though, I've heard Andy say that's in I-2, it's not in light industrial. What comprises a business that is light industrial versus heavy? Is it not traffic count? Is it not activities?
There's actual definition.
Yeah, there is. We have a bunch of, I have them on my desk.
But the I-1, this basically would be an unmanned, very minimal transportation in and out, no visibility as far as lights working late at night because it's an enclosed, double-walled.
What about the flare?
There's no flare.
How often do these compressor stations flare? Never if they're operated properly. They flare 24/7. Well, wait a second. I've been past a bunch of compressor stations and none of them. Okay, what I'm saying is, this is not a flaring station. This is not the top of a well that's just been drilled and flared. The industry does not like to waste gas or put gas into the atmosphere because it's counterproductive. I'm not saying they're perfect by any stretch, but neither was electricity when we started or coal or anything else. The reality is, if all the opposition would drop, as soon as we moved it to I-2, I think I'm going to end up putting an application to build a compressor station in I-2 and see that all these reservations are dropped, because theoretically, there should be no opposition in I-2, correct?
Well, I think from an I-2, there's an expectation of heavy industrial could go there. So there's less of a, individuals talked about it this evening that I looked in the area, a light industrial area. If someone called Bruce and said, what's allowed in the light industrial area, it's consistent with the word light. I have the list here, so I'm going to round it off.
So basically, I could put, say, like a Hanco fabrication and metals processing plant in there?
Well, I have to look at the definition.
Well, they're already there. That's why I'm asking.
In the I-1?
In I-1.
And they may be.
And they run 24/7 with lights all the way. Allegheny Millworks runs 24/7 in a good period all time long with sawdust.
If those are pre-existing or not, I don't know.
I just know they're there, and they're in I-1, so.
But from a planning standpoint, if someone makes out, if we have compressors as Under Act 13, there were going to be permitted uses in all these districts where there's going to be no hearing, no evaluation, and the Supreme Court struck that down. Now, if the board allows for a compressor station, more than likely, I think it's a conditional use. To your earlier point, it comes to this board. And this board would have to make sure that they satisfy the stated conditions, including whether it would affect the health, safety, and welfare, and the air of the people living around them. If they did, just because they're in the proper zone doesn't mean they get approved. And the people would, there would be a similar hearing like we had with the ZHB, but before this board.
Well,
but there's a greater expectation that it would be allowed because it's heavy industrial.
But I really have to question light industrial. My understanding is when I was at South Fayette, light industrial was talking about the amount of ingress and egress that occurred on a daily basis, traffic that was an imposition, and other things.
You're right.
This is truly, once this building is built, this is truly a light industrial facility.
One of the issues, if you look at the court opinion, and you're right, some of those factors...
I want everybody to hear that. I'm right.
Now, some of the factors like the traffic once it was built, obviously we said, and the ZHB said, there was no traffic count, there was no traffic study. They said maybe 1 or 2 trucks a day. The real issue under our ordinance was the environmental impact to the people in the area that wasn't answered. That was really, we went through every condition and the court knocked them down. And the court went through every one and said, no, Mark West's lawyer said it's going to be safe and that's good enough. And the court said, you can't require expert analysis because your ordinance doesn't require it. But to me, that went to the weight of the evidence. The zoning board wasn't satisfied that their lawyer said it's going to be safe and everyone's going to be fine. We wanted the studies. We wanted to prove it. And then my problem with the decision is that they put the burden on our board versus the burden on the applicant. But here's the list of uses by right. Assembly and package of finished goods is in I1. Assembly and packaging of finished goods, automotive repair garage, contractor office and yard, distribution, not including truck terminal.
Distribution, this is gas distribution.
Yeah, but they didn't use that one. Distribution business. Laboratory, manufacturing of furniture, medical equipment, musical instruments. It goes on, printing services, research activity, warehousing, indoor storage, business, essential service, farm, cafeteria facilities. So when you contrast that with our heavy industrial, but that was why they went there. They said they're an essential service. We said you're not. The court disagreed with us. Now the ZHB and the lower court.
I'll agree with you, John.
Thank you.
I really do believe that if this was all, and if this all could be, why don't we rezone that piece I-2?
Well, I think there's a real question right now of whether that's even a legal spot zone. Because when you look at our map, it is an island out there in the sea of residential
It's
areas.
it's any zoning is that way. John, you represent many communities. Every community has those islands out there. Mount Lebanon, Upper St. Clair, the city of Pittsburgh. So saying that it's an island does not really...
Alan, to your point, I would recommend it to Peters Township and they're looking at a rezoning because in my opinion you can only have this activity, drilling included, in industrial areas. We don't have the industrial areas to support it. Mike said it all the time. What are we going to do to accommodate that? To make sure we stay constitutional, the board has to look from a comprehensive standpoint, what areas can we make industrial? And will those areas survive constitutional scrutiny? If we create an industrial zone that's an illegal spot zone, then it's no good. And so if we didn't create that zone and allowed an industrial activity, it's the same analysis. So the board has their homework to do at some point to get our ordinance right going forward. And I appreciate the comments because I wrestle with the same issues as to where.
John, we faced that for years, though, that Cecil Township adopted zoning in 1964. And at that time, the only heavy industrial I-2 zones that were created were on existing businesses. So all those had an existing I-2 business. There really wasn't at the time much vacant I-2 property. It just accommodated what was there. And this was before I was born. And to this day, the township has not created 1 new inch of I-2 property. So almost, as Mr. Rank mentioned, almost every piece of I-2 has been occupied since 1964.
And that's
You and I, wait, hold on a second. You were born, Tom. You and I talked about that along with, we talked about, and this is why I've been pushing for a year that I've been on the board, that we need to sit down and do a formal comprehensive plan. We haven't done a comprehensive plan in 20 years. I got criticized up one side, down the other, because I wanted to spend, I I wouldn't spend all this money doing a comprehensive plan, but we wouldn't be in this situation, as Mr. Ray pointed out.
$1,000 is a lot of money.
Absolutely not. I never said 75,000.
175.
Nobody said 175,000. In fact, we have a quote for 40,000.
So Cindy, if we rezoned this, there are basically, from my recollection, I could be wrong by a few feet, there's not one residential home within 1,000 feet.
I think that's what the court found too.
There is no other initial fully occupied daytime business within 5,000 feet. Mux is the closest, whatever it's called. The rest of the property is basically lowland, flood-prone, near wetlands. Part of this land is probably wetland. So if we took out the wetlands component of this I-1, you probably only have about 20 acres. And here on this 20 acres, in a very isolated, remote area, we can have this facility and not truly impact anybody immediately.
Ellen, I'd like to make one comment. There is a school within 1,750 feet of that.
1,750 feet is more than a quarter of a mile away. What's
I
between?
understand,
What's
but
between?
but that's what John's saying too.
What's between this property and that
The
school?
impact hasn't been discussed.
What's between this school and this property? A very large hill of about 200-foot elevation differential from where the plant would be versus this. I would really think it would take a Hiroshima-sized attack to be damaging a school more than a quarter mile away, 200 feet over.
It's not enough on the possibility that this could explode and impact the school. And do you really want to face a group of parents and assure them?
Cindy, there could be the train loaded with propane go down here, and it could blow up too. We could be hit by a meteor before I go home tonight. We could all get some sort of Ebola. But you know what? These are microscopic things. I really want to deal like this with reality.
One more, Alan, one more comment. Alan. One more thing. What you're saying, and I don't think you would have half the people in this room here against this if they were satisfied that there was going to be no health concerns. And the problem that they have, if they came in and they proved and they brought, their air modeling in, their studies, saying no one's going to be affected, because we can make generalities, but the board's obligation is to make sure it's accurate. They just can't take, like what you said, it's not going to go over that hill, it's not going to, maybe that's true, but I think from an evidentiary standpoint, if we have that information, then we would look at the environmental impact and make a decision on that. Our argument was it was not presented to the ZHP.
So, from what you just told me, you would not be opposed and you would not appeal it should Mark West be able to provide you with valid environmental studies that would prove...
That's part two, Alan. Part one is that it's still not an essential service.
Well, okay, wait a second.
The second part, yeah, if the court came, I think...
You said nobody would be opposed to...
No, I said I don't think you'd have as many people here.
Okay.
If they were satisfied the DEP was watching them. The DEP is not looking at public health. It's not their job. I've deposed 10 people from the DEP, not one has a public health background. That's the Department of Health. That's not them. They look at pollution and numbers and say, yeah, you can put off this much pollution. Where it goes is not their concern. It's not that they don't care, it's just not something that they're studying or implementing. The Supreme Court has now thrown it in this board's lap and said, it's your concern. You figure out where it goes to make sure everybody's okay. And I would suspect that if we knew it was going somewhere, we could say, Mark West, implement these measures to negate those emissions traveling that far. Mark West could meet that and satisfy everybody. But since we don't know what the mitigation factors are. So that's...
We'll pursue